Very good afternoon to you. Welcome to yet another episode of our show, Road to Vote 24, where we bring you panel discussions, interviews, and debates as we build up to Election Day on Wednesday, the 29th of May. I'm your host, Vuyo Mvogo, and here's what we have in store for you today. It's the only province in the country not run by the ANC. And we're talking, of course, about the Western Cape here. With 7.4 million people, the Western Cape has the third largest population in the country. Its contribution to GDP is standing at 14.2%, second only to Gauteng. Unemployment rate, it's standing at 20.3%, and there are over 3.3 million voters, registered voters, I should say, in that province. And you have close to 30 people and parties who are vying for those 3.3 million registered voters. And if you look at the composition of the legislature currently, 44 seats are, of course, available in the Western Cape for parties to, of course, vie for. The DA currently has 24 of those seats, which translates to about 55.45% of the vote. The ANC has half that number of seats that the DA has, and they are sitting at 12 seats in total, or 28.64% of the vote. At a distant third position is, of course, the EFF with 2 seats, which works out to just over 4%. And you have the Good Party, the ACDP, the Freedom Front Plus, and Al Jama, all having 1 seat each. And that's the current composition of the Western Cape legislature. As to how it's going to differ, of course, come May 29, this is what the parties I'll be speaking to in a short while, and the rest of them who will be contesting this election would want the biggest slice of. The view, of course, among people is that, if polls are to be believed, maybe is what I should be saying here. Something, of course, that is strenuously dismissed by the DA. It is that the governing party in that province could score below 50% in this election for the very first time since 2009. And that, of course, is the subject of today's online poll question. Do you believe that the DA will retain its majority in the Western Cape in this election? Your options are yes, they will, or no, they won't, or I'm just not sure. You can respond to this question by scanning the QR code that's currently on your screen. Your votes will come through in real time, and we'll display them throughout the next hour. So please don't be shy. Let's engage. Scan the code on the screen with your phone and be part of the conversation. Nestled at the southern tip of Africa, the Western Cape has long been regarded as the crown jewel of South Africa. It boasts, among others, stunning landscapes, a growing economy, and a population of just over 7.4 million residents, as I told you earlier. However, amidst the accolades, housing lobby organizations Ndifuna Ukwazi say the province also boasts some stark disparities among its citizens. Nasipi Same filed this report.
For over a decade now, the Democratic Alliance has held sway over the Western Cape. Its terms and offers has been marked by some notable achievements. These include 27 out of 30 municipalities receiving clean audits in the most recent cycle. Yet, the Cape Chamber of Commerce and Industry says more can be done.
South Africa has probably got the highest unemployment rate in the world right now. It is shocking. So even the Western Cape at 20% versus approximately 35% in the rest of the country, we are relatively better. We're more competitive. We have more businesses that are willing to invest money and they believe in the future, and therefore we have growth and employment growth in certain sectors. But the important part to note is that 20% unemployment is completely unacceptably high. We are far below our ability in this country.
Housing activist organization Defunukwazi says beneath the surface of prosperity in the province lies a tale of stark inequalities. It's called on the DA and national government to bridge the growing socio-economic gap.
With majority of its citizens caught in the grip of poverty, particularly in the outskirts of the city of Cape Town, majority of people are not receiving basic services, whilst the city centre remains partially unjust. Since 2014, housing provision has been on the decline and people have prefigured housing solutions through occupations. It's wasteful expenditure to use 73 million of taxpayers' money to build car storage when there's a housing crisis in the Western Cape. 600,000 backlog of the people that are on the waiting list are from this province.
Despite being hailed as the best-run province, the Western Cape continues to grapple with pressing security concerns. Deadly gang violence, which is particularly prevalent on the Cape Flats, remains a serious challenge. While 8 of the country's top 30 police stations with the highest incidence of contact crimes are located in the metro municipality.
We're in a very crisis point at this moment. Western Cape, like I say a few interviews before, becomes a graveyard. It's no more a city where you can say there's happiness, because every 5 minutes of the day you just hear shooting, whether it's in the rich area, whether it's in a poor area. It seems like police can't stop these gangsters from killing our children, our women. We need DSD, we need educational department, we need more police in our areas. Here we're having the mobile police in Hanover Park. Just look at the high sandbags. The police is covering themselves. Why are they covering themselves and not covering our community? We need to wipe out the drug lords in the Western Cape. We need to unite in Western Cape.
For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Nasipi Same in Cape Town.
Please welcome our panelists for today's show. The DA's Alan Nwindi is the current premier. He is seeking re-election. Representing the ANC is a member of its Western Cape Provincial Executive, and that's Khalid Syed. And from the EFF, we have their provincial chairperson, Unathi Ndame. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to come on the program.
No, good afternoon. Thank you.
Well, if I may start with you, Alan Nwindi. I mean, it's the most used phrase, certainly by members of your party, who say that things are better where the DA rules, and more often than not, they are referring to the Western Cape. Are things really better in the Western Cape?
So thanks for your, absolutely. I think we got the lowest unemployment rate in South Africa and reducing all the time. You've got a much better chance of getting a job in the Western Cape than anywhere else in the country. In the last 5 years have shown that. In the last 5 years, despite a pandemic and everything else that went along with it, in the Western Cape, you definitely can get a job easier. In actual fact, 78.9% of all new net jobs in our country come out of this one province. Of course, we also have a growing population, people coming here, so they vote with their feet every single year. In the last 10 years, or just over 10 years, since 2011, and you were talking about the population, our population since 2011 has grown by 2 million citizens. We also, as a province, have to then spend money according to our allocation of taxes. And of course, your inserts spoke about housing and crime. We have to spend money that we get via the division of revenue. The interesting thing is we're the third most populous province, we're the fastest growing province, and yet we get the fifth biggest budget. Limpopo actually gets more money than the Western Cape. But we like to spend our money efficiently and effectively, so we've got the best audit outcomes or the best governance in South Africa, the only province with 100% of our departments and 100% of our entities with unqualified audits. And of course, we are under pressure with more and more people coming here every year to look for services. But that's fine. We've got to build schools faster. We've got to build more and more health facilities faster. We've got to come up with innovative ideas. And I think primarily the safety plan is one of them, and I think you can already see in the statistics there again.
We'll drill into some of those issues in a short while. Khalid, your party did have a chance, to run the Western Cape. Once upon a time, Ibrahim Rasool was a premier there. Lynn Brown was a premier there. Has the DA done better than you did?
Thank you very much. So the DA have governed the Western Cape for 15 years. We've seen 15 years of decline. And this particular period from 2019 up until now has been actually their worst period. We governed the province from 2004 up until 2009. And Alan has spoken, or the Premier has spoken about housing delivery, unemployment, crime. I can say that the ANC in each of those aspects was more people-centered. We delivered much more. If you speak about, for example, housing, human settlement development, our approach was to consistently consult with communities, not go to court with communities as they're doing in Seapoint, for example, when there's public-owned land that needs to be used for integrated human development, and they go to court and now they want to talk. We engaged with communities. That is why, when we governed the Western Cape, just an example, the ANC delivered just over 164,000 housing opportunities at an average of 34,000 each financial year. What has been the delivery of the DA during that particular period? Much less. They've only, just during this term, 34,000 housing opportunities in an entire term of government. That's less than what we delivered each and every year. We talk about community safety. Their approach to fighting crime is some safety plan which is there in paper and focusing purely on LEAP officers and so-called boots on the ground. Ours was to tackle the socio-economic challenges facing our people, tackling health, tackling issues of education, building hospitals in our communities, and again, making communities feel part and parcel of the solution. We had a People's Parliament. What has happened to the People's Parliament now in the Western Cape? It's non-existent. Crime fighting, the Bambanani program, where community members were incentivized to work with SAPs. Now what do you have? A safety plan which is up in the air. You've instead got a focus being placed, and we heard this excuse now about no resources and all of this and that. You've got excuses. You've got the governance failures and the perpetuation of a two-tailed city, one for the rich and one for the underprivileged. The excuse of that is placed at the door of national government. It's placed at the door of the issue of budget and of so-called influx. Even the discourse they use. We find a province that is deeply divided. We do not have an inclusive Western Cape. When we governed, we had a Western Cape that was a home for all citizens, and active attempts were made to build unity among citizens. We had massive public-private partnerships. SMMEs were being assisted. There was a reduction unit around red tape, for example. We'll bring all of these programs back when we take over the Western Cape after the 29th of May.
Now, Unatindame, I mean, your party only came onto the scene in 2014. Before then, you saw successive governments of both the ANC and the DA running that province. Are they poster children? Is the DA and the ANC poster children of all good things? Of all good things that are good about governance in South Africa, as they both claim.
Yeah, no. Thank you very much for having us here, and greetings to viewers. On the side of the EFF, we believe that Alan is talking for the opulent areas of the Western Cape. He does not talk for the majority of the masses of the Western Cape, particularly the black masses and the colored constituencies of the Western Cape, because their services are mostly prioritizing those areas. They don't budget for any of our areas. There is a gross lack of service delivery in the Western Cape. They have neglected all the areas in the Western Cape. They are not servicing Khayelitsha, Mitchell's Plain, Hanover Park, Cryfon and David. So all those areas are not being serviced by the DA. Their systems have collapsed because they are saying that they are scared of the protection fee, they are scared of criminals, they are scared of thugs. So they have stopped services in all those areas. So the EFF is the only party that is going to deal harshly with the criminals. The EFF is going to come in and provide our people with land. It's going to expropriate the land without compensation and give to our people for housing. And it's going to create industries for creation of the employment. It's going to make sure that it insures the security guards, it insures the cleaners, and it insures all the government employees that are now working through labor brokers. We're going to demolish the labor brokers as the EFF and make sure that all the employees are employed directly by government so that they can get all the benefits. The DA in the Western Cape is championing racism. That's why they are targeting the taxi associations here. They're impounding, making millions of rands out of the certain bloods of the taxi brothers. So they're making sure that through their corrupt means, they're impounding taxis, redirecting all the metro officials to go and impound taxes instead of focusing on the drug dealers, instead of focusing on gangsterism that is happening on all the townships here. So that's what the DA is known for. They're only talking for the white people that are voting for them. They're not talking for the masses. So, for example, here in Cape Town, they're not even campaigning in the black and colored areas because they're being rejected, particularly on the question of how they handled the Palestinian question. They are being rejected by all Muslims in the Western Cape because they believe that what is happening in Palestine is not genocide. They are supporting actively the Israel government on what their stance against Palestine. So the people of the Western Cape are not going to vote for the DA, and it's on record that the DA is going to get less than 40%, and it's the EFF that is going to grow immensely.
Okay. Now, Alan Winley, are you not campaigning in the Cape Flats and in the townships?
Absolutely. We campaign every single square meter of this province. There's no place that we don't campaign. And you just have to follow my personal campaigning and where I campaign. And I mean, that answers that. I don't think you need to give it any further.
The allegation, of course, refuses to go away. I mean, every election, this has been, the one big accusation that you are neglecting the townships, you are neglecting, the poorest. Of course, giving preferential treatment to the people in Camps Bay and those areas.
That's absolute rubbish because if you take our budget, 75% of our budget gets spent in exactly those areas that Unati is talking about. That's where we build hospitals, clinics, that's where we fund schools. We don't fund private schools, we fund government schools. And that's where we spend our money when it comes to social development. So if we look at where, who are the 500,000 learners that get a meal every day at school? I promise you they're not in the leafy suburbs. Who receives the social development funding of R1 billion every year from social services that goes to those NGOs that offer those services? I promise you that's exactly the communities that it is. Who are the 109,000 food kitchens and soup kitchens that are qualifying for funding? The 512 community kitchens that are qualifying for funding. Where are those services? Where are we building houses?
With that record, what then do you attribute your loss of votes in the last election to?
We obviously in the last election, are you talking about the last provincial national election?
Yes, 2019.
Yeah, so we dropped by 1.8%. It wasn't a massive attrition of votes. And of course, my job is to make sure that we get 50% plus one in this province. We retrain a majority. And those citizens, if exactly what the two other panelists on this panel are saying are correct, then of course there would be thousands of citizens leaving our province, going to these well-run provinces that are our neighboring provinces or the other 8 provinces in our country. But it's exactly the opposite. It's those citizens that are leaving those failed areas, because here you can get education services, you can get health services, you get a far better opportunity. And the most critical measurement in South Africa on whether you are narrowing the gap between rich and poor is the Gini coefficient. And go and have a look at the Gini coefficient. It remains stagnant across the national numbers. And there's only one province where it comes down every single year, and that gets driven by the economy and jobs. And when you create more jobs, or the businesses create more jobs here than anywhere else in South Africa, of course that's going to help. Okay. It's going to make it better for the citizens in this region.
Now, if you've just joined us, the battle for the Western Cape is the focus of today's debate, and slugging it out are the biggest 3 parties in the province currently. Remember, you can also participate in the program by responding to our online poll question. Do you believe the DA will get a simple majority in the Western Cape in this election? You can respond to this question by scanning the code that's on your screen right now. Your votes will come through in real time, and we'll display them throughout the hour, so you can be part of this conversation. Scan the code on the screen with your phone. Of course, this debate continues. Now, Khalid, I mean, the same question, I asked Alan a little earlier, applies to you as well. I mean, if your record is as illustrious as you were claiming, it was how you dealt with jobs, community safety, and other socio-economic challenges, what then do you attribute your loss of support over the years to?
Let me firstly, as I approach that particular question, and it's a good question, let me say that the blue lies that the DA have just put across now, even around housing, around education. I mean, we've got an unplaced learner crisis as we speak in the Western Cape. Housing, human settlements. I just come back now from Saldanha Bay in poor communities, African and colored communities. No refuse removal. No lights even in the streets. How do you build safer communities like that? So the issues are enormous. And these blue lies that are now being perpetuated as a result of panic, the DA knows that they are losing power in the Western Cape. But let me come back to your question. And we are not perfect. No organization is perfect. Most certainly there were internal differences which led to factionalism and infighting in the party at the time, and we did let our people down. We are not we're not going to run away from that. But at the same time, that does not mean that we failed to deliver. We delivered. In fact, we speak about job creation in the Western Cape. The DA inherited a functioning economy in the Western Cape from us, which they've only grown by 2%. Look at education. We were consistently number 1 in the matric pass rate. They've now taken us down to number 5 in the entire country. Hospitals. We built many hospitals. Khayelitsha District Hospital, Mitchell's Plain. What has the DA done? They've closed down J.F. Jooster Hospital, promising to build Klipfontein Hospital. Till now, it's not yet built. We are going to build. The government of the poor in the Western Cape will build J.F. Jooster Hospital before the end of the 7th administration. Even the approach that my colleague, the Honourable Premier, gives us around how they've spent and this type of thing, it's absolute attempt to deceive the people. Because obviously, you don't need to invest in resources for schools and hospitals and roads and houses in the affluent areas. Those people are already the majority. They are already advantaged by apartheid privilege, which the DA seeks to protect. You need to make an extra effort in areas which are not privileged. This shows that they don't even have an understanding of the impact and legacy of the past. And this is why, and my colleague Unati spoke about the issue of Palestine. This is why this premier who sits here now, when it was the State of the Province address, could say, that he's sympathizing with the children of Ukraine and of Syria, but he could not mention the children of Palestine. This is why his leader goes and says, with regards to the genocide, that one man's genocide is another man's freedom fight when it comes to the fight against Israeli genocide.
To hold your thoughts.
And we as the ANC have shown that globally, even our struggle at the ICJ against Israel, we have shown that globally, in our very inherent nature as the ANC, we are a party for freedom, for justice, and for humanity.
Now, Unathi, I mean, from where you are currently in sheer numbers terms, that is, I mean, nothing short of a miracle will catapult you, I mean, to the very top. I mean, irrespective of your stated, of course, principles or the issues on which you are fighting this election, where land, insourcing, and everything else that you mentioned earlier. The question is, even if you grow, I mean, your support 4 or 5 times in this election, you will still be. I mean, chances are you won't be where you would want to be able to effect the changes you'd like to see. How are you going to use your votes? How are you going to use your votes beyond this election to bring about the change that is necessary?
Okay, I think you have not been following the politics of the Western Cape. The EFF has grown immensely in the Western Cape. There is a study that you can research. They are saying that the EFF is growing from 3% to 18%, and the ANC is dropping to about 8%. It's not the EFF that is saying that. It is the research that is saying that. So the EFF is a serious player in the politics of the Western Cape, and it's aiming to win in these elections. But to answer you on the question of prioritization, the EFF is going to continue to prioritize the masses of our people. It's going to make sure that we are not anti-education like the DA leaders. This DA leader is on record last week saying that they are going to take the funds away from funding education and to some crime fighting arrangements, which they mean by targeting the tax associations. And we're not part of those things. The EFF is going to prioritize young people, is going to make sure that the youth of the Western Cape is developed and is able to access employment opportunities, because it's going to create industries. It's going to return the textile industries that were in Athlone, that were in Hanover Park, and make sure that all those areas have got functioning economies again. So it is the EFF that deals with the racism cases here. We've got thousands of workers that go to our places, to our offices, to complain about the racism of the DA, and we are always confronting and defending our people against the DA in the Western Cape. So the EFF just had a rally here, my brother, where it hosted about 30,000 people. And for record, the EFF won an award last year on the 6th of December in Saldanha Bay. So the EFF is in charge of the award, where it grew from 15% to 57%. So for you to claim that the EFF is not a serious player, I think you are just not following the politics of the Western Cape, because what the record there is that the DA is declining immensely because of the Palestinian question, and it's being attacked a lot by the Patriotic Alliance on the colored constituencies. The ANC has collapsed in the Western Cape. So the serious player here, it is the EFF, and the EFF is going to make sure that we take our people out of the bondages where they find themselves in. We make sure that they also get the services in the townships. We make sure that we kill the protection fee completely. We make sure that the women are able to walk in the streets freely and enjoy everyone else that is enjoying walking in the street. So it is the DA that is not prioritizing our people. So for them to say that they are campaigning, they know very well that they don't even have posters. They are being rejected across the townships. They don't have any machinery of campaigning in the townships, in both the colored constituencies and in African constituencies.
Your government stands accused, Alan Winde, as you have heard from your fellow panelists, of being biased. In other words, you only fight crime in the more affluent areas, and you do very little in the townships. And if you look at gang violence in particular, 404 people were killed, in the Western Cape as a result of gang violence between April and December 2023.
Thank you very much. I think before I get on to safety, which is a very critical issue, I just want to say to Unati, and of course the listeners, that you do know that the EFF and the ANC are in government in the Western Cape, in Knysna, and what Unati is saying and what they do are two different things. In actual fact, it's obviously don't care about the citizens at all in the municipality where they govern. In actual fact, this last week they met with one of the biggest developers to write off 60 million rand of his unpaid taxes and rates. It's quite interesting. They do exactly the opposite to what they say. But of course, I think we need to, when we talk about safety, we must be very clear on one thing. The responsibility for policing in South Africa and the criminal justice system in South Africa is at national level. It rests with the national government. The Constitution says that provincial governments in their community safety role produce an oversight document called the P&P. We do that every single year. That tells you all of our visits to the police stations and what they look like. What I've done is I've taken 1% of our budget and I've put it towards safety. And I've created a safety plan which has got two legs on it, a policing leg as well as a violence prevention component or leg to it. Violence prevention is the key area where we need to intervene because that stops young boys dropping out of school, keeps them in school, keeps them in line for employment instead of going towards the gangs, etc. And even though it's not our responsibility, I advocate for the devolution of policing powers to provinces because I do believe that that's how globally we will find, if you look at best practice, we will find a better way of policing. Even the Gauteng Premier seems to be doing similar things now because he's so frustrated with...
Practically, what will devolution do exactly, Premier?
So first of all, let's just give one example. If you go to the highest crime areas, exactly what both of the opposition speakers have been talking about, the highest crime rate areas on the Cape Flats where murder is the highest, they have the least deployment of police officers in the nation. The least. So the average is one police officer to 430 citizens. In those areas like Mitchell's Plain, Khayelitsha, in Cloetisville, it's one police officer to 1,200 citizens. It's one police officer to 800 citizens in most parts of Khayelitsha. It is more than double the population rate to what the norm should be. That is exactly where we are deploying the LEAP officers. And there's only one place in South Africa where the murder rate has plateaued or declined, and it is in those areas that we are deploying. We're deploying in the last 4 years, because the first year we put the plan together, in the last 4 years, and go and have a look at the studies from the ISS. You will see exactly that. We used to be 5 years ago the murder capital of murders per 100,000 in South Africa. No longer. We are now moving from the third towards the fourth least. Who has taken over from us is the Eastern Cape and KZN. They now have more murders per 100,000 than the Western Cape. The Western Cape is sitting on 57, KZN is on 60, and Eastern Cape is on 75 murders per 100,000. That is the intervention. And of course, I've only taken 1%. It is not our competency, but we cannot stand back and say, but it's not us, it's national government, national policing. So we are intervening, showing that it's making a difference. And that is to say, at the end of the day, if we can make a difference with that amount of money, imagine if we had deployment control and we could use the data and evidence systems that we use outside of what police are using. You can go to any of those things and ask those station commanders. They will say, please, we want LEAP officers.
Khalid, I mean, do we know why, or from your analysis as the party, having looked at this question, presumably, I mean, do you know why, I mean, the gangsterism is confined to, of course, it does spread, or the activities thereof, you know, but why it's confined in the Cape Flats and why it's been so difficult to deal with this question? When you look at the size of the area, it's small and it's something that should be dealt with fairly easily. Some people say, are they being simplistic?
You see, the Premier has just indicated to us why they are failing to deal with the issue of gangsterism and crime in the Western Cape, and in Cape Town in particular. Why Cape Town remains, and the Cape Flats remains, one of the highest crime zones across the world, because the approach to dealing with crime is fundamentally flawed. Our approach is different as the ANC. Ours is to deal with the socio-economic conditions and to ensure that communities are empowered. Number one, they are defunding the community policing forums. Number two, taking away money from education and health for some safety plan, which is not even your competency. They fail to realize that a provincial government needs to create the conditions and put conditions in communities in place to prevent our young people from joining gangs and from going to a life of crime. Even the image that it's put out, it's seen in our communities, it's seen as something laudable to go into gang activity. What does the DA-led City of Cape Town do with absolutely no oversight from the province, from MEC Bredel or from Premier Windy? They give housing contracts to gangsters. Yes, I've said it. They give housing contracts to gangsters. And those things have been investigated. So this is what you have.
Quickly, Alan, is that true?
So this is the reason as to why you are not going to be able to deal with the issue. Instead, they want to go towards devolution of powers, which is going to lead to brutality, like they've done with pro-Palestinian protesters in Sea Point, like they are doing with painting over Palestinian flags. Imagine how Cape Town and the Western Cape is going to look at with this devolution of powers with regards to policing, when they cannot even spend the money that they're given by national government to fulfill their constitutional obligations around issues such as human settlements, education, and healthcare.
Unathi, do you have a solution?
Yes, we do have a solution as the EFF. The EFF is going to make sure that we stabilize the electricity crisis.
No, we're talking specifically about crime and gangsterism.
Oh yes, the EFF is going to deal decisively with gangs. The reason the gangsterism here is so prevalent is because the DA is working with gangsters in all the clubs and the businesses in the city center CBD. The DA is working with those people. The gangsters of the Western Cape are the ones that are funding the DA. That's why the DA cannot say anything about gangsterism. That's why they are channeling all the security officers to other useless things instead of dealing decisively with gangsterism. The reason that gangsterism is so much here is because it's not a priority of government. That's why it's happening like that. So the EFF is going to make sure that it prioritizes the killing of the gangsterism, the protection fee, the mass killings that are happening in Khayelitsha and Gugulethu. We're going to make sure. But I want to come back to the issue of electricity here. The city of Cape Town is selling the electricity from Eskom. So you buy electricity to Eskom and then it goes via City of Cape Town. They charge 50% of that. So the EFF is going to make sure that people are getting 200 units off for free on electricity. Instead of the DA, when people buy for 200 rand, they only get 5 units. So that is what is happening here. The DA is stealing people's money through water rates and everything else. So that's why people of the Western Cape and particularly the City of Cape Town are rejecting this DA. So they must tell you here in this interview, why have they stopped contesting by-elections in the entire Western Cape in all the African areas. They have stopped contesting by-elections. They don't want to be embarrassed because all these areas are rejecting the Democratic Alliance and no one is going to vote for them here. That's why they know that they're going to get less than 40%. They have realized it. They have accepted it.
Okay. Gentlemen, let me thank all three of you for coming through today. I will hope to revisit these issues in the next coming couple of weeks before the elections. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. And as I say, we'll be revisiting some of these issues before we get to the 29th of May. Now, if you still haven't, please remember to scan the QR code at the top right hand of your screen for the poll we are running, which is also live on X at Newzroom 405. Tell us whether you think the DA will retain its outright majority in the Western Cape. We'll put up the final result of the poll before the end of the show. Welcome back, and of course, do remember to participate in our poll question this evening. We're asking you whether you think the DA will retain its majority in the Western Cape. Do vote now. Do scan that QR code, and of course, tell us what you think. So, in the run-up to the May 29 election, we've seen the Electoral Court being called on to adjudicate several matters, including one between the ANC, the IEC, and former President Jacob Zuma's MK. We've also seen other parties, such as the newly launched Labour Party, head to the Electoral Court in a bid to settle an issue with the IEC. Today we ask, is the prominence of the Electoral Court, and other courts, of course, in these elections, good or bad? Well, to help us talk through we are joined by legal analyst Melusi Xulu. Mr. Xulu, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. I don't remember, so many. Well, of course, there was a lot happened in 1994 for those of us who covered that election. But in subsequent elections, I don't remember this many, threats, but also very real court challenges.
Good afternoon to you, Putu, Fuyo, and to the viewers at home. Thank you for having me. I think this is a highly contested election. It's 30 years after 1994 in the democratic dispensation, so it's expected, if it's highly, contested, that there will be some challenges. But the Electoral Court is trying to do its best to deal with the matters as urgently as possible. So it was obviously created by the Electoral Commission Act, the 1996 Act, and is obviously there to oversee the elections and the duties of the IEC. So I believe that because of the issue or the fact that it's a highly contested election, we're going to see more of it. And I think we are anticipating this week's decision, which was also based on their judgment earlier on this month.
Scholars and I suppose lawyers as well bring all sorts of arguments as to whether litigation is good or bad. But then again, if you are stuck and each party is confident that it has taken a correct position, the courts are the final arbiter. But the impact, of litigation on election processes, but also with the public in mind, what people see, what they hear, and how they make up their minds about the credibility or not of an election.
Yeah, well, litigation is obviously the final step that one needs to take, in particular to the election processes or decisions. So I think at the end of the day, the Electoral Court will be the one that will be expected to play a role so that it ensures that the elections are free and fair, and that justice is done. So the public will obviously anticipate that the Electoral Courts will make the right decisions, obviously based on the constitutional issues or based on the Constitution, because at the end of the day, every law must abide to the Constitution. So the Electoral Court is there to play that role. And I think so far, obviously we'll have different views. I think so far they are doing their job well, except to say on urgent issues, maybe one might say they haven't been as urgent as expected, because the recent judgment that they made regarding MK and IEC, I think it took 3 weeks for them to give written reasons. So maybe if they can urgently, make a judgment and give reasons to assist, because it's a situation where the reasons are expected to be given as soon as possible. So I think that's where maybe one might have a complaint, but I think the citizens are expecting that they do fair judgments, which so far, obviously we can debate that, but I think they've done the job quite well, except obviously on not doing it as urgently as expected.
But how realistic is that expectation? Fair, yes, they should be fair. They should also be urgent, given the very tight, timetables that an IEC has to work with. But how fair was in the real world? You don't have that type of under normal circumstances. Cases are not, dealt with as expeditiously as things are expected to. Right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not as practical as it can be, but it will just depend on the capacity. I just did read an article in preparation on this, that one of the challenges that the Electoral Court is having is that it's not as capacitated as it could be. So maybe that's what it should be looked at. But at the end of the day, even if the reasons take maybe longer than wanted or expected, as long as it's fair reasons that are given, I think that is what is expected at the end of the day. But I'm just saying that hopefully there will be an innovative strategy to deal with urgent issues, especially when it's elections coming up like we're having right now.
And you have to feel sorry, well, have sympathy, I mean, at least for an IEC that has to begin printing ballot papers while at the same time having to deal with these cases. In fact, these cases holding up their processes.
Yes, I mean, they have to depend on the decisions that are made. But, you know, what we would want more than anything, besides, you know, interpreting this topic legally, is where, you know, the society gets fair decisions that are made by the commission and also the electoral courts, and we have free and fair elections without violence. I think that's the most beautiful aspects of our democracy that we are expecting, and hopefully that will be the outcome that will happen after the 29th of May. At the end of the day, that's what the purpose is all about, because the electoral court is there to ensure that the elections are done properly and to look at the actions of the commission or the IEC. And at the end of the day, we don't want any, violence happening because of the elections. And I think there are duties to ensure that that does not happen. And so far, as highly contested as these elections are, I think they've done their duty. And obviously, the big elephant in the room, although I don't think this was our intention to discuss today, I think hopefully, you know, also the matter that has been taken to the constitutional courts, I hope that the right decisions will be made so that, you know, the society also understands why they are made from a constitutional perspective. And we're hoping to have free and fair elections and without violence, because that's what we've been trying to drive to from 1994 until now, to make sure that we have a prosperous country with democratic principles and the elections done fairly and freely. And
the conundrum that the IEC is faced with here is, for instance, the Constitution. There are court papers to the Constitutional Court seeking, clarity on how the, Electoral Court arrived at the decision around clearing the way for former President Jacob Zuma to stand for Parliament. On the one hand, they have this task we're talking about, that there was this strict timetable that they have to adhere to in order to be able to give us a very credible election. But on the other, there are these matters of law, which is also something that is also in their interest to resolve. And some people would say by going to the court, it is delaying its own progress, and others, of course, you will have seen or read about this, saying it is trying to be, a referee and player, or it is trying to play politics, and all these things are happening at about the same at the same time, with very little time left before the election.
Putuvoyo, there are two things that come to mind on what you've just said. The first thing, which is there is obviously there'll be an apprehension by the parties that are taken to court, that why is there so much interest for the IEC to take this matter to court when it has been dealt with in a sufficient way, they would think. But the second aspect is, precedents can be laid, and obviously what the IEC is trying to say is that they want this clarity to be done so that in future, if the same thing happens, there is a precedent that is laid there. It's just that there are issues, obviously, with this conviction and sentencing of the former president, where there's a school of thought that says, but there was no case number, this was a criminal matter, or it wasn't a criminal matter. There's a debate around that, which I think we've dealt with for the last 3 years. So obviously there are those issues as well, where even the former president has asked that those 6 justices recuse themselves. So I don't know whether they anticipated that, but obviously it needs to be dealt with as well. But I think the issue that is more important is that there must be clarity so that in future, if someone else is, I don't know if this would happen because it was the first time. If someone is convicted and sentenced at the highest court in the land, we would want to know what would happen then, you know. But I don't foresee the same sentencing and conviction happening in future. As the justices said when they were convicting the former president, is that it was not an ordinary way of doing things. So, but to just summarize my answer, I believe that the most important thing was that the IEC wanted clarity for future purposes.
Let's leave it there, and thank you so much for your time this evening. Very complicated one indeed, especially the latter part where now the former president is asking 6 judges to recuse themselves from this matter. Earlier in the week, we asked a few Western Cape residents what would motivate them to vote in this election, and here's how they responded.
It's going to be my first time voting this year because I want to vote for change.
Honestly, I think it changed. The youth, born free, the young, the student. So, of course, they go with the ANC. But ngoku mna ndiyayibona uba no ANC ayiseyiyo la ANC iyiyo. So ngoku I want to vote because ndifuna umone change because yabona uba kweli xesha sikhoyo ngoku ebephethe ANC but ayiyo lento sifuna uyibona. Ayiyo lento singathanda uba siyibone.
Go nne le tlhabologo mo South Africa dilo tse dintšha because dilo tse dintsi no ya la go sa tlhole go na le tlhabologo mo selong. So ke tlo ntho nketsa go ke vote ke go ke batla go ka moso ke batla go bona South Africa e changeile e le ntho e le gore ke batla everyone mongwe le mongwe le mmereko mo South Africa.
I want to advise youth, vote for what you think is the best for you. Don't vote for what the parents or what the family say. Vote for what we think and what is right for you.
As a student, as Yolanda, I believe qualifications that we're studying for, mazinga basic qualifications is useless. Basic qualifications as kwabezibekwe phayana masithi sigqiba ufunda sikwazi uphangela sipeye kungathi kuthiwa hayi ke shem ufundile but now uhleli ne-qualification yakhe ekhaya. Le party that I will vote for must provide for imisebenzi as youth.
Let's now bring you the results of today's poll. We've been asking whether you believe the DA will get a majority in the Western Cape in this election. 84% of you believe they will. 14% of you say no, they won't, and 2% say they are not sure. Now, earlier today, ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula was at pains trying to explain why the party decided to postpone a disciplinary hearing scheduled for Tuesday. That hearing, of course, was to look into former President Jacob Zuma's move to campaign for Umkhonto weSizwe party while still a member of the ANC. Now, whether the party should or shouldn't charge its former president is, of course, none of my or indeed this show's business, though one does hold an opinion on the matter. The subsequent decision by the MK party to, in turn, threaten to protest in front of Luthuli House, the ANC's headquarters, on the day Zuma was scheduled to appear, is also that party's business, even though, again, we have an opinion about that too. Of primary concern to us, however, is the potential for unnecessary confrontation, violence, and chaos, which could impact the May 29 elections. At this time, the majority of South Africa are still reflecting on the past 30 years of democracy, both the good and the bad. I recall one of the darkest days in our history when the IFP marched to Shell House, then ANC headquarters, and that's back in 1994, ahead of those landmark polls. When the dust settled that day, 19 people were left dead. We've seen also in subsequent years, in Gauteng and in KwaZulu-Natal, people doing things in the name of one person or the other, or one leader or the other, with disastrous consequences for the rest of us and for the country, including death and destruction of property. Here I remind you of the July unrest of 2021. Now, any move to prevent a repeat of such violence and possible loss of life is therefore encouraged and welcomed. And that's it for our show today. This episode will repeat at 11 p.m. on Thursday. Please join us on Thursday at 11 p.m. Goodbye.